Emotional suppression feels like control. You feel something rise, irritation, sadness, fear, and instead of expressing it, you tighten, you steady your voice, you regulate your face, you say, "I'm fine." On the surface, this looks mature. You didn't overreact, you didn't escalate, you didn't burden anyone. But suppression is not processing, it is postponement. Emotion is physiological before it is verbal. It changes breathing, it alters muscle tone, it shifts attention. When you decide not to feel something, you are not erasing it. You are interrupting its expression. The body does not interpret suppression as resolution. It interprets it as containment. Containment requires effort, micro-tension in the jaw, subtle contraction in the chest, a slight increase in vigilance. These adjustments are small, but repeated daily, they accumulate. You may believe that because you did not cry, you are no longer sad. Because you did not argue, you are no longer angry. Because you did not admit fear, you are no longer afraid. But emotion does not disappear when ignored. It loses its conscious label, and once unlabeled, it moves. Suppression works temporarily because it reduces visible disruption. It protects reputation. It protects relationships. It protects composure. Composure feels powerful, especially if emotional expression once led to chaos. If you learned early that showing emotion created problems, you learned to contain it. If sadness was dismissed, you internalized it. If anger was punished, you swallowed it. If fear was mocked, you concealed it. The system adapted. Adaptation feels intelligent. You became stable, predictable, difficult to destabilize externally. But internally, the energy does not vanish. It waits. Emotions are regulatory signals. They are designed to move through you. When interrupted repeatedly, they convert from signal to pressure. Pressure does not scream. It builds. You may notice small shifts, a shorter fuse than usual, a heavier fatigue than expected, an unexplained restlessness at night. Nothing dramatic, just subtle leakage. The mind says, "I'm fine." The body says, "Something is unresolved." Suppression creates a split between narrative and physiology. You tell yourself you are calm, but your nervous system remains activated. Over time, this split becomes normalized. You stop recognizing what you feel in real time. You recognize only behavior. I snapped. I withdrew. I felt numb. But the original emotion, the first wave, was interrupted. What you refuse to feel consciously does not dissolve. It reorganizes. And when it reorganizes, it no longer arrives as sadness or anger. It arrives as something less clear, less direct, harder to trace. Suppression protects the moment, but it does not remove the emotion. It only delays its expression. When emotion is suppressed, it does not disappear, it relocates. Emotion begins as sensation, a tightening in the throat, a heaviness in the chest, a heat behind the eyes, a subtle agitation in the stomach. Before it becomes language, it is already in the body. If expression is interrupted, the physiological activation remains. The nervous system does not receive closure. It remains slightly elevated, not enough to alarm you, just enough to alter baseline. Suppressed anger often becomes tension, in the jaw, in the shoulders, in the hands. Suppressed fear becomes vigilance, scanning tone, reading micro-expressions, anticipating rejection. Suppressed sadness becomes fatigue, not dramatic exhaustion, just heaviness without clear cause. You may believe you are emotionally neutral, but neutrality with muscle contraction is not neutrality. It is restraint. Emotion that is not processed remains metabolically active. Your body continues to carry it in subtle ways. You grind your teeth at night. You struggle to relax even when nothing is wrong. You feel inexplicably irritated by minor inconveniences. The original emotion is gone from awareness, but the activation persists. The system seeks discharge. Emotion is movement. If direct expression is blocked, movement finds indirect pathways. Restlessness, overworking, compulsive scrolling, over-exercising. Activity becomes a substitute for feeling. Sometimes suppression produces numbness, not because there is no emotion, but because the nervous system dampens intensity to prevent overflow. This dampening does not target one feeling. It reduces range. Joy narrows. Excitement flattens. Connection dulls. You trade volatility for blunted experience. It feels stable, but it is restrictive. There is also cognitive displacement. Emotion that cannot surface as anger may resurface as criticism. Emotion that cannot surface as grief may resurface as impatience. Emotion that cannot surface as fear may resurface as control. The content shifts. The activation remains. This is why reactions sometimes feel disproportionate. A minor comment triggers a large response. A small inconvenience produces unusual frustration. It appears irrational, but it is cumulative. Suppression creates storage. Storage increases sensitivity. The threshold lowers. What once required significant provocation now requires very little. You are not overreacting in isolation. You are reacting to layered residue. Residue from previous moments where emotion was managed instead of processed. The body keeps score, not symbolically, physiologically. Heart rate variability shifts. Muscle tone adjusts. Breathing patterns shorten. These changes become baseline. You adapt to the tension. Until you forget what relaxed actually feels like. Suppressed emotion does not evaporate. It converts into posture, into tone, into subtle agitation. And eventually, it demands expression in a form you did not consciously choose. If this made you pause, like the video. Subscribe if you want to keep observing. Suppressed emotion does not stay silent. It changes form. When anger is not allowed to surface directly, it rarely disappears. It becomes sharp humor, subtle sarcasm, a clipped tone that feels reasonable but carries heat. You insist you are calm, but your delivery says otherwise. When sadness is not processed, it often becomes detachment. You withdraw slightly. You respond more slowly. You engage less deeply. You tell yourself you are just tired. And maybe you are. But sometimes fatigue is grief without language. Fear, when suppressed, often disguises itself as control. You overplan. You overconfirm. You over-explain. Not because you enjoy precision, because uncertainty activates something you do not want to feel. Indirect expression is strategic. It allows emotion to move without appearing emotional. You maintain composure while releasing pressure. But indirect release distorts clarity. Instead of saying, "That hurt," you become distant. Instead of saying, "I'm overwhelmed," you become irritable. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid," you become rigid. The original emotion is hidden even from you. This is how misalignment forms. Your internal state says one thing, your external behavior says another. People respond to the behavior, not the concealed emotion. and that creates confusion. You may feel misunderstood, but what is visible is not what is primary. The primary emotion was intercepted. What remains is secondary expression. Over time, this creates relational distortion. Others adapt to your irritability instead of your sadness. They respond to your control instead of your fear. They accommodate your withdrawal instead of your hurt. The original need goes unmet. Suppression therefore multiplies consequences. The emotion itself remains unprocessed, and the indirect behavior creates new tension. This tension confirms your belief that emotions complicate things, so you suppress more. It becomes cyclical. Emotion arises. Suppression interrupts. Indirect expression leaks. Relational friction increases. Suppression strengthens. The loop reinforces itself. Sometimes indirect expression is internal. Self-criticism intensifies. Rumination increases. Motivation fluctuates. You cannot locate the cause, because the cause was not permitted to surface clearly. Suppressed emotion does not leave the system. It bypasses awareness. And when awareness is bypassed, choice narrows. Instead of consciously feeling anger and deciding how to respond, you unconsciously express it through tone. Instead of consciously acknowledging sadness and seeking support, you unconsciously withdraw. The emotion moves, but without your consent, and when it resurfaces indirectly, it feels disconnected from its origin, which makes it harder to understand, harder to trace, harder to resolve. Suppression does not eliminate emotion, it fragments it. When emotion is delayed long enough, you stop noticing the delay. You tell yourself you are composed, rational, low maintenance. You rarely escalate. You rarely demand. You rarely expose what unsettles you. From the outside, this looks stable. But stability built on suppression has a cost. When you mute anger, you also mute clarity. When you mute sadness, you also mute depth. When you mute fear, you also mute instinct. Emotion is not just discomfort, it is information. Suppression interrupts that information. You lose access to real-time feedback. You cannot tell when something crossed a boundary because you learned to override the signal. You cannot tell when something hurt because you converted hurt into silence. Over time, this creates disconnection. Disconnection from others, and disconnection from yourself. You begin responding from habit instead of awareness. You perform calm instead of inhabiting it. There is also a subtle erosion of identity. If you consistently suppress emotion, you become skilled at neutrality. But neutrality is not authenticity. Authenticity requires access to internal states. When those states are chronically managed, you experience yourself as flat. Not unstable, just muted. Muted joy, muted anger, muted longing. The system becomes predictable, but not fully alive. Emotional delay also distorts timing. When feeling is postponed repeatedly, it accumulates. Eventually, expression arrives with disproportionate intensity. You react more strongly than expected. You withdraw more abruptly than intended. You say something sharper than planned. It feels sudden, but it was building. Suppression is efficient in the short term. It prevents immediate disruption. But long term, it reduces emotional literacy. You lose precision. Instead of identifying, "I'm disappointed," you register only, "I'm irritated." Instead of identifying, "I'm overwhelmed," you register only, "I'm exhausted." Precision narrows. Without precision, regulation weakens, because regulation requires accurate recognition. You cannot process what you refuse to name. You cannot release what you do not acknowledge. Allowing emotion is not indulgence. It is integration. It means letting anger inform boundaries, letting sadness inform attachment, letting fear inform caution, not acting impulsively, but not interrupting the signal. When emotion is felt in real time, it completes its cycle. Activation rises, expression occurs, regulation follows, the system resets. When emotion is suppressed, activation lingers, regulation is partial, reset never fully arrives. What you do not feel consciously does not vanish. It reorganizes behavior. It reshapes tone. It influences choices. And often, it directs your life indirectly. If this exposed something you recognize in yourself, consider liking the video and subscribing.